Hey everyone, welcome back. It's another episode of the Marketing Share. Thanks for joining us. I'm Alec, your host, and with me always is my co-host Barb. How you doing, Barb?
Good.
Um, all right, we're talking about rebrands today, right? Isn't this the topic?
Yeah, actually, the topic is we have a great expert in this field, Todd Allard, and he actually is a longtime colleague of mine back in the day from BBDO and from the agency business. And he was actually on Wrigley. I was on Sizzler at the time, So since then, he's actually moved into retail spaces.
Mhm.
But we're talking about brands today, and we're talking about when brands go south and when brands, stumble. And the fact of the matter is sometimes it's an external factor. Sometimes, like a product recall or something. Sometimes it's something we've created. Think the Bud Light campaign that went south, right? Sometimes it's all about maybe a broken trust or something else in the marketplace. And sometimes it's like a competitor that's come in and swooped in and changed your whole business dynamic.
Mhm.
Whatever the way down went, right? Whatever happened to those brands, they need a fix and they need somebody to take them from flatline to resuscitation really quickly.
Mhm.
And this leader has got a lot of experience on turnarounds,
Mm.
turning around brands from trauma or from, stumbles, what have you, and resuscitating those. And I think that's kind of an interesting topic, both for B2B and for B2C.
Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to this conversation because I'm not a brand marketer. I'm just going to say that up front, right? A brand obviously is something that you typically think of when you say marketing. The first thought probably usually comes to mind is brand, right? But I don't consider myself a brand marketing expert, right? I'm really more about on the B2B side about positioning, messaging, but there is a lot of brand that is part of that. Like what do you want to be known for? And you have to be able to articulate that really, really well. And if you can do that, that is part and parcel of your brand. So I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe I just talked myself in a circle saying that in a way I am a brand marketer. I just don't ever think of myself in that way in terms of sometimes I think people think, oh, brand, it's just the flashy stuff, it's just the logo, it's the colors, it's the logo.
No, the
No,
brand, it's opposite of
yeah,
that.
right.
It's what other people say about you,
Right.
not about what you put out in the marketplace, right? So
It's the
that's what
brand,
people
yeah.
need to get.
Yeah, it's the equity. So, okay, so this will be fun because what do you do in those situations where your brand has gotten tarnished or there's something has happened, whether external or internal? Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and let's go talk to Todd.
All right, cool. Welcome to the Marketing Share. Hey guys, I'm here with my lovely co-host, Alec Chung, and a great old friend of mine, Todd Allard. Hey guys.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Todd.
Hi.
Hey, we're doing a fun kind of reminiscent piece today, and it's really about the world of brands, right? And we know that every time we have a touch point with customers, we either detract from our brand or we enhance that brand. And that's the topic today. It's really about when brands go wrong or flatline, as they say, and how we resuscitate those brands. And we've been in the business for a while, so I think this could be a super fun discussion because we've all experienced it. Whether the brand trauma is happening on the outside, like a product recall or service recall or problem, or if it's really a self-inflicted wound, think about, the campaign at Bud Light and so forth. There's always been trauma like that.
Yeah.
So, Todd, welcome. You and I worked together 100 years ago at BBDO. So much fun. Tell us a little bit about your brand journey. When we worked together, you were on Wrigley and I was on Sizzler restaurants. So big brands for sure.
Yes.
Tell us about your career journey and where you're at now.
Well, from our jumping off point at BBDO, I actually spent time with 3 other agencies. So I went down the street to Foot Cone and then spent the better part of 12 years at 2 agencies in Minneapolis. Campbell Mithun, there we go.
Yeah.
It's so
Love
long,
them.
I can't even remember. Campbell Mithun and Fallon. But after the agency world, I got tired of trying to convince others to do what otherwise I wanted to do. So I jumped client side with Best Buy when I had an opportunity to go over and be a part of, at the time, was an inside agency within the company. They had a fully functioning ad agency. And that was a good way to transition, I think, from the world of advertising into the corporate setting, and then eventually moved to the marketing team in Best Buy. After Best Buy, I worked for a couple of different specialty retailers, Advance Auto Parts and Lumber Liquidators, which became LL Flooring, and then an education company that was in the career education space with campuses all over the country. And then most recently finished up with a startup fintech platform in New York City. And now I'm a fractional CMO working with companies here in the Twin Cities that need my help.
That's awesome. That's how we reconnected again, right? Through the
Yeah,
fractional coffee talk chat. But I started in the client side, same as you, in-house marketing. So that's kind of interesting. We get kind of a view of both worlds, I guess.
sure.
Todd, so now that you're doing fractional and you're helping clients, how do you typically engage? Like, how do you help them? What does engagement look like for you today?
Yeah, the good question. It has varied. So this is the second time I have been a fractional CMO. The first time was actually with Lumber Liquidators, and that actually became a full-time CMO role that I held for the better part of 2 years. So kind of a 3-year total commitment working with them. And I was in charge of the entire marketing team with that tour. This one's been a little bit different. I'm one of 7 different fractional leaders that this CEO has hired. He's a big believer in fractional talent. And so he's got a lot of folks that he's brought in. And particularly in the marketing space, he had no less than 3 fractional leaders. One that was driving what we were doing from a product perspective. So this is an IT outsourced managed systems platform company. And we had one person who was productizing all of our services. We had another person who is kind of a CRO or chief revenue officer who's driving both kind of tactical day-to-day marketing as well as the sales team. And then what I was brought in to do was to think about our strategy and our brand 3 or 4 years into the future. What are we going to look like, 5 years from now? And what does the brand portfolio look like? And ultimately, how are we going to be recapitalized in the future by the next PE firm that we might be working with? So I'm really focused on trying to help the organization align to the right customer audience and then building a brand experience that we can deliver consistently to win those customers over and over again.
That's really interesting that you have so many fractional leaders there. They've really embraced that. I don't think I've heard of a company that what you said, 7, including yourself.
Correct.
I think that's pretty unusual. I think that's atypical. So kudos to him for trying that.
Yeah, and I think he has been through a couple of different transitions as a CEO, and has certainly caught wind of the fractional movement as he was in transition. And like I said, he's a believer in it, and he wants and needs, some high caliber talent that for this company they would probably not otherwise be able to hire. But bringing us in on a fractional basis allows him to do that.
Yeah. Quick question. Can I ask you, if you don't mind sharing? You don't have to sell the company, but roughly how big is this company?
It's about 60 million,
Okay.
and it's I would say it's a national company, but really the main focus of our footprint is in the Twin Cities.
Okay. Hmm.
That is fascinating. I have to admit, I haven't heard of that either. That's one of the first times I've heard of it. Yeah. And there's a debate around that. That could be a different podcast, I'm sure, right?
I'll come back.
Right. But today is all about, those dumpster fires that we've seen in some cases, right? In some brands. And I think you can characterize some of these, right? And the first one, I'm gonna start us off, right? Because it's an old example. And I'm gonna start us off with when brands lose trust, right? And I'll give you an old one. This one was when I was in working with Anheuser-Busch one year, way back in the day. And they had actually lost share in their number one marketplace. And the reason for that wasn't because people didn't like the beer, they had a recall or something went wrong. It was really because there was a challenge in the retail sector where when they had a brewery strike, all the people, all their customers did not get product in an equal fashion, meaning they gave it to some and then they didn't give it to others. So really it was a retailer issue that they didn't want to carry the beer anymore. So that was a brand and a trust breaker, if you will, right? And what they did to actually get back that trust is they put a lot of money into the marketplace. We were in that marketplace at the time. I was scheduled one of 30 young people at the time to be a marketing leader in a market that would do events and all sorts of things. But that's just one example. And I know, Todd, you've got a couple. But what happens when brand trust goes south?
Yeah, I unfortunately, or fortunately for me, have had several examples of where trust was really broken by something the organization did. And then I was brought in to help dig out from the hole that they had created to then reestablish, as you said, trust in the brand and in many cases the traffic that was coming, because a lot of these were retailers, and ultimately putting their trust in the organization to in many cases spend quite a bit of money on the products that they were selling. So one of those was Lumber Liquidators, and before I arrived, they were found guilty of bringing tainted wood. They were a hardwood flooring company. They brought tainted wood into the country from China, and were found guilty of that and had been fined millions and millions of dollars. And talk about a highly regulated industry. Because they had had a judgment against them, we had all kinds of hoops that we had to jump through just to operate. And I was brought in to help rename the organization, because Lumber Liquidators wasn't actually a great name for the organization anyway, in terms of what we sold and the enhancement that we provided to people's homes. But there was also the trust issue with the old brand. And so we went through a pretty exhaustive process of really getting grounded in who our best customer was to ultimately win the day for the brand going forward, and then understood what, in this case, she wanted in terms of an experience with us, so that as she was making the decision on which piece of flooring to spend $10,000 on for the project that she was commissioning for her home, that we could earn her trust and give her the expertise that she needed to make the right decision. And then, of course, once you've changed the name, everything goes to zero and you start over again from an awareness perspective, a trust build, and an overall customer experience. So it was quite an adventure.
Yeah.
So, Todd, are you saying that as part of figuring out how to rebrand and rename, you went to a key customer? And was that part of it? I'm trying to make that connection there, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, we did tons of research, Alec, starting with, should we change the name at all? Was there any equity in the name brand that we had and the black and yellow logo that we were currently using that we didn't want to throw away? And beyond the first round of research that told us, yes, in fact, we should change the name, we had constant check-ins as we were iterating around what the name should be, what the new identity should be, what colors we could use. I mean, I had to break the board of their addiction to black and yellow to get them to a different color palette, because no matter what I did, when I took black and yellow logos into groups, they threw up on it.
Oh.
So I eventually had to say to the board, can I please take the handcuffs off and just try something else? And they finally said, yes, go ahead. And we ended up with a completely different color scheme, which was a huge advantage for the trust that we were trying to establish with our largely female customer.
Hmm. Hmm.
I remember I've done a lot of healthcare, right? And so they always say, stay away. Red is blood, black is death. You have to stay away from all these colors based on, your predisposition of what it means to somebody. Therefore, you see a bunch of healthcare companies, they're always in blue, right? There's
Yeah.
always that color scheme out there, which I think is fascinating. How about you, Alec? You got any trust brands that you've worked on or issues in those?
I don't know. See, this is the part it's a very interesting dialogue for me because my experience has always been in B2B, and there are brands in B2B, of course, but the question it makes me wonder is just like like you talk about measuring brand, and you did an assessment of how much is there brand equity there. Like I'm curious to know, like, how do you figure out if there is brand equity, right? So maybe you can share some about from the consumer side, because I think your experience is mostly consumer. Is that right, Todd?
Well, interestingly enough, Alec, in this case with Lumber Liquidators, there was both.
Okay.
So on the one hand, you had customers, DIYers that were coming in and doing projects on their own, buying the wood floor and going and installing it themselves.
Mhm.
But a big part of our business, probably 40% at the time, were installers or they were interior designers, and they were making recommendations on behalf of their clients of where to go to shop and buy the flooring that would be part of the project that they were working on together. So we spent as much time with installers and interior designers talking to them about brands in our space as we did talking to the end customer who was ultimately paying for it and making the decision on the product that was going to go into their home.
Hmm. So so for our listeners who are non-brand marketers, I would put myself in that camp, right? I don't consider myself necessarily a brand marketing expert. If I want to measure, if I need to measure brand equity or assess what my brand's equity is, how do you recommend you go about doing that? What are the ways to do that?
There are many ways to read that on an ongoing basis. Certainly, there's all kinds of online tools that would allow you to do a really fast check. You could literally create a small board of existing customers that you could check and ask questions of. And we did that quite frequently, where literally 24 hours and you have an answer on, the state of awareness or how people are viewing your brand.
Hmm.
But I found the best, I think, resource for me has been that those companies that will go and do a custom tracker that they will contact customers thinking about being in your category on a quarterly basis.
Hmm.
And then they go through just a series of questions that they ask, that they always ask, so that you're able to trend the data from one quarter to the next. And you're constantly looking at, am I growing or am I in decline? And what's nice about that approach is that you can always ask the questions about yourself in context of your competitive set.
Hmm.
So it was also helpful to understand, well, we're here in awareness, but they're actually here. And so not only is our awareness low, we've got a pretty big gap between us and our competitors.
Hmm.
And what we would find, because you can drill it all the way down in some cases into key markets, and going back to this example of Lumber Liquidators and LL Flooring, is we would go into the markets where we were literally being attacked by a new upstart competitor called Floor and Decor, which started in the Southeast and then just kind of grew throughout the country. They're now nationwide. But at the time, they would go into a market and absolutely attack it and flood it for the better part of 3 to 6 months. And then they would pick up the circus and go to the next town and leave just the store itself, kind of right at Main and Main, as the key marketing driver for the business. And all of that money that they had invested in one market was moved to another. And so we could see the impact of that in this tracker, where we would go up or down depending upon where Floor and Decor was attacking.
Hmm. Fascinating. Okay.
I had an example too, where honestly, if you're actually in the healthcare space, right, you need trust more than anything, right? That's like the huge trust. So the question is what kinds of trust do you have? In some cases, right? You might have had an academic point of trust. In another case, you might have been the trusted person to provide consistent care over and over again. So when brands go south in those areas, right, if they can't deliver product on time, I worked in some of those businesses where you couldn't get product from overseas, right? So you had supply chain issues, right? That were a real issue, especially if you're launching products. This happens all the time in the device space. What do you do about that? And how do you address some of these crises? I think the only thing that you can do is come clean, be honest, and, over rotate on the other end of what that looks like, right? So you're reaching out to customers, you're really making it better for them, and you're mitigating those crises. How about you guys? Any crisis brand stories that you've been in other than that one, your last one on competitive?
Well, I have a long list of
You go,
crisis
Todd. You've
brands.
got some good stories.
Yes, the other one that I had that was a similarly large crisis, again coming off of some nefarious action from the previous brand and owner, was this organization that I worked for called Zenith Education Group, and they had a brand that they had acquired at the behest of the U.S. government because the previous owner, a company in California, had been engaged in some not so good lending practices. And the work that they were doing was really more about the money that they were making and less about the outcome that they were providing to the students that were coming into their schools. And so when I joined the organization, both I had a habit for a while of helping brands that have been dragged through the mud of 60 Minutes, where they, just were interviewed on CBS late Sunday night and just torn apart. And so Everest University was one of those brands that was just ripped to shreds because of what they had done and how they were kind of preying on these students. And so I was called in to help reimagine how this brand could be successful. We renamed the company, or renamed the brand of the school, so that it could have a fresh start. And then we learned through, again, research, what was most important in terms of those trust drivers, Barb, for the students that were there. And what we learned was that we literally needed to build a network of support around these students, a lot of which were single moms going to school to try to make a better life for themselves and their kids by getting out of the doom loop of the part-time job and getting into a career. And Altiris, which became the new name of the school, try to find a name in education that isn't already taken. It's nearly impossible. So you literally have to make up a word at the end of the day, which is what we did. But Everest was put to bed and Altiris was launched. And we saw some really great turnaround stories from the work that we did to drive new traffic, to drive trust in people making the decision to come to school with us. But again, you had to make it through the mud of 60 Minutes, or in the case of LL Flooring, the FBI, to then start over.
Todd, though, like when you were telling that story, right, the thing that came to mind was, how can it work, though, just to change a name and then that fixes the problem? And I don't think that is all you did, because in the stories that you've told so far, it wasn't just slapping a new name on.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, that was actually I would say a very small part of the work that was done. I think it's what happened with the new name is it became kind of an icon for both the customer, but maybe even more so for the employee, to say, okay, we now have a fresh start. We get to leave the past behind and move forward. And the work that we did, again, with our best customers helped us realize that we were really good at providing a great customer experience to the customers that we were trying to win. And so under a new name, with a new story, a new customer experience that we were perfecting based on what we had been great at, as well as investment now in telling that story. All of those things worked together, along with some really hard work done by our academic team to reimagine all of the classes that we offered and which career tracks we maintained and which ones we sunset. There was a ton of work done on the entire experience that we offered in all cases to be able to not just win a customer for that one-time purchase or maybe that one-time experience, but we ultimately wanted them, to come back if it was a retailer, to buy again from us. But the most important thing out of all of this was having those customers advocate on our behalf with their friends and family. And that was the ultimate goal for me as a marketer, was to obsolete myself. Like, I didn't want to be in a position where we had to invest any money in advertising, that it was purely just the experience that we had created with this customer in mind that we were trying to win, that we could now consistently deliver. So all of that went into the winning recipe for what we built.
Yeah. Did you have to fight in order to get the company to see that deeper driver that was necessary, or did the experience that they'd already gone through of having this brand crisis already galvanize them?
Yeah, they were already ready for a change.
Okay.
So there wasn't really any pushback other than perhaps not liking the name.
Okay. Yeah.
I remember one meeting that I was in with all of the leaders at Zenith. And I said, okay, as we go forward here, one of the things we're going to do is change the name so that we can have a fresh start. And I said, but I'm going to draw a line through the middle of this room, and this half of the room is going to love the new name, and this half of the room is going to hate the new name. And eventually you'll just get used to it. But that's the nature of the beast when it comes to new brands, is you're never going to find a brand that works for everybody. So you have to find the right brand that works for the customer and then go forward that way.
That's great advice.
In the hearing business, we had to come up with a new name for the new technology literally every year, right? And you often had to have different names for different models and those kind of things. So, and you had to have something that worked across the globe.
Right.
So, I can't have something that means, I hit my wife in another language, right? So, coming up with those kinds of new names and that kind of, regularity of creativity over and over again, I feel for you. I totally get it.
You make a really great point that you cannot put things out into the world without checking all of the, escape hatches here, that you're not going to fall into a hole without knowing that that means something inappropriate in another language or another culture. So you've got to do your homework and make sure that you've got the right solution to go forward.
Right. Okay, I'm gonna put Alec on the spot here for this one because I was there during this trauma. How about when the employee has a birthday party and they didn't ask for a birthday party? Just a strange, off the wall kind of brand fall.
Yeah, and honestly, so we've talked about this before on some other episodes, more when we've been talking about PR crises.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that this scenario here is probably more of a PR crisis. The company's name kind of got, for a flash, was for a period of time, for a short period of a flash moment, was attributed to just a really terrible sounding story. And so to me, this was more of a case where you got to just let it ride out. Like, don't resist the temptation to try to defend yourself too much. That was my perspective. Others in the company, leaders in the company, didn't quite agree. But I think at the end of the day, it did eventually peter out. But it just, for that period of time where this story flashed, it just sounded terrible. It sounded awful, right? The story, if you recall it, because it reached like international levels, but it got picked up on international news stories. But it was a company where Barb and I were both at, and some employees wanted to throw a birthday party for one of their coworkers, and he kindly asked, "Hey, look, please don't. I don't want that attention, and it would cause me undue stress. I just rather something low key." And they still did it, and then, there's some miscommunication there, right? So I don't want to make the story more worse than it is or anything like that. There's clearly some miscommunication that could have happened, but So then a reporter seizes on that moment and writes up a really, catchy headline, clickbait type thing, and it just
Clickbait,
catches on wildfire. So, Barb, I mean,
Yeah,
when
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
you remember that, right?
I do. And honestly, I don't want to make you go through the pain because I could feel the trauma in your voice as we're talking about it. But truthfully, this is a situation of today's world, right? When something goes wrong today, I'll give you an example. In the old days, we had a promotion for a product like this, that when you open this can, it was supposed to pull out $1, right? And it was a cool promotion. Well, it didn't work. The technology didn't work. And a bunch of these dollars fell into the cans. It was like a mess. In those days, it was a bad situation. But in today's world, it can be a viral situation that goes really
goes live
crazy, right?
immediately.
Yeah, look at the Bud Light thing. You know what I mean? That was insane and crazy. Anyway, regardless of what the trauma is from your company, we all go through it. And companies sometimes do this themselves, unbeknownst, right? That this is going to have some future effect. I'll give you an example. Mid-size restaurant business, right? And actually has steak on the menu and has salad bar. All of a sudden, the steak and the salad bar work really well for that restaurant, right? And they start to actually grow their business, and it's really exciting. And so more interesting things go on the salad bar for that restaurant, right? More interesting things, more meats go on the salad. All of a sudden, instead of ordering them together, people move completely over to the salad bar, right? And they stop ordering the margin steak business that was in their business, right, to begin with. Now, what's the matter with that? Is that a strategic change that you made? Is it an evolution of something that sounded like a good product idea at the beginning? And then all of a sudden you find yourself in this, oh my gosh, 90% of my business is in the low margin side of our brand. What do you do in those kinds of cases? I mean, in that case, we're all probably traveling on that brand together thinking, aren't we great? We've got a new menu item. It looks terrific. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in this, situation.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the businesses I went into. Think Ponderosa, Sizzler, and those kinds of brands. They all kind of experienced that around the same time. Now, that's a structural issue, but guess what? It became a marketing problem too, because they switched agencies and so forth.
Did you pull back then from the promotion and end the move to the salad bar, or did that become a runaway freight train?
Well, it was so hard because they fell in love with the salad bar, right? And there was more things on the salad bar.
Why wouldn't they? Who doesn't want more cheese on their pizza?
Right. I mean, that kind of thing. So it was like, now you had to reverse Rex everything back to a position where you could actually make money on some of this business. So maybe we put too many rich items on the salad bar and increase it. The problem was the agency gets whacked at the same time, right? And that's usually the scenario behind a strategic miss that becomes a marketing, we've got to swipe the marketing, but it really is rebuilding the brand in a different way strategically for the business.
That to me sounds like an example, Barb, of where your marketing got too creative and got too out on the edge and tried to do something. It worked, but it worked in a way that wasn't good for the business.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
That's the unintended consequences. And you're traveling along it thinking this is great, right? We were there during the food cost conversations and the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you kind of step back and look at it, it becomes, uh-oh. And that's an issue with margin, right? So let's face it. Let's bring this into today's world. Have you ever been in a business that is selling more of the margin product than they are selling more of the low margin stuff than they are selling the high margin, right? And what do you do about that in the branding area? Have you guys had that one? I've had it even in the B2B space.
So when I was working in the automotive aftermarket auto parts business, the real margin in that business is in the hard parts that sits behind the counter that you and I can't shop because, they're all categorized by vehicle, make, and model, and it would be unshoppable to put it on the floor. So what's on the floor are the things like wiper blades and wax, and a lot of the kinds of things you can otherwise buy at Target. So trying to drive that part of the business is often difficult, and those are the things that happen when the car breaks. Often it's not just regular maintenance, although things like brake pads are certainly that. So we actually built a loyalty program that was designed to drive that hard parts customer into the store on a much more frequent basis. And again, we learned through research that we had done that these customers were shopping in our category probably 10 to 12 times a year, but we were only getting one, maybe two of those visits. They were going to other auto parts stores. They were going to dealerships, junkyards, you name it. They were going to all of these other places. And so we wanted to give them an incentive to come to us. And in our case, we had the problem of having grown up through acquisition. So none of our computer systems talked to each other, which ended up being a good thing because the loyalty program that we created then, by definition, had to be a point in time program. There was no accumulation of points, which is your typical construct for a loyalty program. But the good news with that is that the incentive that we gave people was immediate, and their opportunity to use it for their next visit was also immediate. However, what we found, not surprisingly, is that it impacted margins. And eventually, I think they tried to tune the program after it was kind of outrageously successful in its first couple of years to pull some of that margin degradation out of the plan. And I think it really upset then the balance of what it was driving, which was more traffic more frequently. So it's oftentimes you do have those unintended consequences, and you're trying to thread a needle between a frequency driver of traffic and customers coming in and profitability. And oftentimes one has to win and the other loses.
I totally hear that. Okay, let's talk about a couple of examples that are probably less traumatic and maybe closer to home, right? These are more when you come in as a fractional, these are more typical, right? When you're in the sea of sameness of every other brand, what is that? What are some of those examples, where you really have to break through? This is the one we see all the time in the fractional world, right?
Yeah, this was not something I ran into fractionally, but it was the same brand that I just spoke of for the loyalty program. So the automotive aftermarket parts business is that sea of sameness, and people go to the car parts store that's closest to their house. That's
Yeah.
the default.
Yeah.
And there's lots of them, and you have to decide as a customer, am I going to make the easy right-hand turn into AutoZone, or am I going to turn left and go across traffic and go to O'Reilly or to Advance or Napa or Pep Boys? I mean, there were just a multiplicity of brands that we were up against that, there's really no difference between us and everybody else. In fact, people were so confused by our brand, Advance Auto, and AutoZone, which also started with an A, that they would write checks to AutoZone in our stores. Because what the heck, it looks the same. It's almost the same color and nearly the same from a naming perspective. And so they would get confused. And so we ultimately then decided to really direct that brand towards a much more focused audience. So if you think about the demand curve, the pig and the python is where all of the brands in that category tend to focus.
Mm.
And we decided we were going to focus all of our efforts on the front end of that demand curve, because that's where all of the guys that were doing the really sophisticated repair jobs lived. And it's also where the margin lived in the category, which was great as well. And so really telling a story with that customer as the focus, and then reimagining the customer experience for that customer to really send them the signal that we were in the business of taking care of them first and foremost, allowed us to, at the time, temporarily turn around where the business had gone, which was in a pretty negative direction. That brand has since kind of ebbed and flowed, but when I started with the company, the stock was $30. When I left, it was about 200. Because
Nice.
we had figured out a way to drive the business through that heavy car guy customer by focusing on them and focusing everything that we were doing on them. Now, that didn't mean that if Barb walked through the front door and said, I need a set of wiper blades, that we wouldn't have helped her get those and have them put on her vehicle. But it wasn't who we were built to serve. And that's really the message we landed with our team, was that we want to really be about this car guy audience and be serious about helping them, making sure that we have all the right parts that they need in stock, that we're focused on getting them everything that they need for the job that they're doing at home, because the last thing they want is to come back to the store in the middle of a project. So just understanding kind of who we were for and then building everything based on who we were trying to win allowed us to see some really good breakthrough from the sea of sameness and positivity from a traffic perspective.
Todd, that to me sounds more like a brand repositioning. Did you also have an accompanying refresh of the brand image because it doesn't sound like you changed the company name, but was there also a brand refresh to go along with that?
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of work, Alec, that went in, like the previous examples that I gave, where we were thinking about kind of all aspects of the customer experience, and we kind of tore apart every aspect of that customer walking in the front door, which was the customer that was doing the work themselves, as well as how we were serving the customer that was going out the back door, which was the professional customer. So we were running parts to garages on an ongoing basis. And so we had to figure out how to serve both. And the biggest challenge with both of those audiences was having the right part for their vehicle in stock when they needed it. You think about how many cars and each year and each model and how many parts there actually are. You're not going to ever have all of those in one location. And so our online ordering and locating capability really had to be enhanced to be able to send the customer to the right store where the part that they needed was located. So there were a lot of things that went into the customer experience that also then went along with a relaunching of the brand. And we didn't relaunch the brand really until the end because we wanted to make sure that we had fixed all of the other things for that customer that we were trying to win, so that by the time we started telling the story, all the other things were in place and were working smoothly.
So,
go ahead.
No, so I think the thing that's common across everything, example you've given, whether it's because of a crisis or some other reason, the brand, the change in the brand identity or the change in the brand look has to be accompanied by a substantial change to the underlying business itself. Your positioning, your targeting, your messaging, who you're going after. There has to be a story there in order to make that brand refresh or relaunch successful.
Yeah, and it has to be consistent through every touch point that you have with your customers, whether that's how we answer the phone when somebody calls and asks about a part, or they go online and look it up, or they buy it online and they come into the store and pick it up and they want to have it prepared for them in 30 minutes. I mean, all of this stuff that looked at every aspect of the customer experience was fair game for us, as we were making sure that before we started to claim a better experience for this customer, that we had addressed everything that was important to them.
This is about, brands are much more than logos and names and colors, right? They are literally touch points that you have. And we always talk about this in terms of consumer brands versus B2B brands. Bottom line, this is true of both, right? Because you must have a great experience whether you're B2B or B2C. It really doesn't matter. So, I'm a big believer that, brand work is all across the business. And I'll give like one little other example, right? Let's do the example of when your brand is not looking like what's happening in the business. And I'll give you an example. As technology changes, we've all been in the technology world. We are in the technology, right? As technology changes, sometimes you're slower to make those changes on the brand side. And all of a sudden, you come up against a business that looks like your old father's Oldsmobile, right? All of a sudden, you have this legacy brand that you're trying to bring into the future. Have you got any of those? I've done those in hearing, right? Which is, how do I get it out of an old electronic thing around your ear and transform it into a technology that's changing and totally connected in all ways of your life, right? So, making sure that you are keeping up with the brand messaging is keeping up with the brand technology is important.
Yeah, I don't have as many where the technology has advanced substantially and the brand has not kept up with where the otherwise business is going. Usually the problem, I've been brought in to fix problems that brands have kind of gotten off track from what the customer is expecting. Now you could equate that to how technology changes in the case of again, aftermarket auto parts, the way in which the customer related to the experience with us and the ability to find what they were looking for online before they even came to the store, instead of having to call or drive around town to find what they were looking for, was a big kind of step change in our business. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until our supremely gifted digital team reimagined our both parts lookup experience to find exactly what that customer needed, and then tying that to our online systems and our supply chain. Once we've kind of synced all that together, we had a much better customer experience that we could then leverage.
Yeah, and I do think you can lead with customer experience. I think that can be a brand driver and
Oh, for sure.
a place where you take something that was a widget and you turn it into lifetime care or whatever that looks like. That's a way to own a space that's a little bit bigger.
Yeah, all these examples that I've given today, uh, none of them rested on the product being the unique driver of why somebody would come to us or buy from us. They were all based on the way in which we took care of customers.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
a lot of these brands are similar in terms of other specialty retailers: flooring, customer electronics, aftermarket auto parts, education, etc. So in the end, it's how do we make the customer feel? How do we take care of them? How do we show them and demonstrate that we understand them and what's important to them in the process of them finding what they need, and making sure that's always the best. Then that is the piece again that not only sets you apart and gives you a great story to tell, it's the part that leads to advocacy. I had a really great experience at Advanced Auto Parts. Those guys knew exactly what I needed. They had it in stock. When I bought it online and went into the store to get it, it was ready in 20 minutes. I walked in, got it, and left, and I was able to go back to the garage, which is where I really want to be. All of that becomes fodder for customers then doing your marketing for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the goal is to get somebody to be a brand champion, like you
Right
just
on.
mentioned. Oh my gosh. Well, you are an expert at that, at architecting this, Todd. So great.
I've had a lot of practice.
Where can people get a hold of you if they want some brand architecture help or help reimagining their brand?
Yeah, I would be glad to help anybody that's in need. And it's a pretty simple email address. It's just Todd, TODD .Allard, ALLARD LLC.com.
Great. Well, thanks
Wonderful.
for being with us.
Yeah,
Todd, thanks for coming on board and sharing your experiences. We appreciate it.
great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.